The federal government announced today it will be creating a commission to investigate systemic abuse in Canadian sports. This comes after countless calls for a public inquiry from athletes, coaches, advocates, and a parliamentary committee. For more on this, the Minister of Sport, Carla Qualtrough, joins me now. Minister, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So it's not a full public inquiry led by a judge with subpoena power. You're creating an independent commission instead. Why go this route?
First of all, you're absolutely right. So looking at all the various models of inquiries, commissions, public processes, reviews of systems within the past 20, 30 years, some really stuck out to me. A Dublin inquiry for doping, a Roy Romano's inquiry into the future of health, right, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. What I really am liking about the TRC is it's trauma-informed, it's victim-centered, it's forward-looking. It starts with the premise that bad things have happened, a system didn't protect you. That's where we are with this issue, right, I think, in my opinion.
But, there are still some athletes who wanted the public inquiry. They wanted an accountability function that exists with subpoena power and judicial weight that may not necessarily be what they get here.
Right.
I mean, what do you say to them?
I recognize that, and I respect a lot of the athlete voices that have called for that. So it's hard for me as a former athlete to kind of disagree respectfully, but I do. I think on weighing everything, all the pros and cons, I still think this is the best way forward for sport. There's also the element that sport is fundamentally a provincial jurisdiction, so there would be a significant amount of FPT negotiation to, under a public inquiry, you have to negotiate and agree on a terms of reference amongst the 14 governments. Not even sure we could get there because it's so provincially heavy. That could take a year, so this thing might take a year before it even starts if it was a public inquiry. Compelling evidence, the corollary to that is the right to cross-examine. So you put an athlete on, in a hearing, and now all of a sudden that's the opposite of trauma-informed, right? It's forcing someone to testify, forcing someone to prove they were harmed. And I actually think we're ahead of that. Like, I don't think we need a 2-year public inquiry to conclude that bad things happened. Let's stipulate that. Let's start from the premise that we believe you, we know you were harmed, we're very sorry that this happened within this system where you were supposed to be protected, and let's move forward to just a better system where this isn't tolerated.
I want to move to the solutions in a second, but just one more question about this. What about the accountability function that often comes in public inquiries of naming names for wrongdoing? I mean, it doesn't seem like this is the sort of thing that will happen necessarily with this. Where does that fit into the larger picture?
I'm not sure the naming specific. Are you talking like individual people's names?
Or organizations or failure?
I think organizational deficiencies will come out of this, absolutely. But there won't be findings of culpability. There won't be, and nor are there in public inquiries, to be fair. But I mean, the point of this is really systemic reform, providing a forum for people to continue to uncover the wrongdoing and looking forward to finding a way to solve these big problems.
So those big problems, I mean, there has been heartbreaking testimony and stories about what has happened that has led us to this point. What do you hope emerges from the other side of this process? Well,
I think there's a practical piece, which is we need to improve our systems. So we need to figure out why this is happening from a systems design point of view. Where are there gaps in accountability, conflicts within boards of directors, lacking of policies within an organization, lack of professionalism. There's a challenge with so much of this is volunteer driven, and there's training, and then there's such massive churn and turnover. But the actual end goal for me is culture change. Like, I want to get to a point where in sport in Canada, we do not tolerate this kind of behavior. Neither the really egregious full-on abuse or the normalized mistreatment that happens every day where it wouldn't happen in any other form. Like, you would never have an education system where parents would yell at the kids of other families that they're performing poorly at what they're doing. That you'd never yell at the teacher as we see people yelling at referees or officials. There's a lot of normalized poor behavior in sport.
Well, there's so many parts to that, though, right? I mean, look, the Hockey Canada problem's well documented. So there's fixing a corporate structure of a large corporate entity that runs a bunch of minor programs. But then there is parents, and then there is coaches, and then there is volunteers, and then there's officials, and then there's fans. Can even a process, as well-intentioned as this one, deal with all of that?
Well, it was like my dream was the Sport We Want Commission, but that felt a little lofty. And I think pragmatically we are going to get a system that's more resilient, that's more responsive, and hopefully the conversations that this will lead to will, evoke the culture change that I really want to see it's super complicated. You add layers of jurisdictions, a volunteer piece, the power imbalances, the conflict of interest. It is fraught, and it's not serving everyone well.
How would you describe the culture now? Because this is all going to start from the premise of, like, let's just accept that there is a systemic problem that has led to horrible abuse and bad processes and bad outcomes have been at the heart of it. I mean, how do you describe, like, the culture in sport? Are there examples of sport in Canada that are good, that it could be a model?
I think that good things happen in sport every day around this country, and I hear daily how lives have been changed and how people have found something inside themselves, that it's building communities, it's building resiliencies, that it's the number 2 way that new immigrants connect to their communities, that it's a common language. Like, there's some wonderful things about sport that we all know.
Of course.
But there are a lot of people who don't feel included in that space, in that system, right? Because safe sport is sport that, is free from discrimination, free from harassment, free from abuse. That's what we want. I mean, if I'm going to be right down to the grass, nuts and bolts of it, that's what we want out of this process, is sport that zero tolerance,
There's rebuilding, I guess, culture,
Yeah.
But I guess another big challenge, Minister, is rebuilding trust in the sports system, especially for the people who were hurt by it.
I agree.
And you're not disagreeing with that. Obviously, you stipulated that right up front. I mean, how do you think this process will help rebuild that trust, that people will be held accountable and this doesn't happen again on the scale?
Yeah, I think that's a multi-pronged approach. So first of all, athletes, athlete victims, athlete organizations, Athletes Can, the Olympic Athletes Commission, the Paralympic Athletes Commission, survivors, Sheldon Kennedy, Allison Forsyth, Gym for Change. I've spoken at length with all of these people and organizations in the development of this process. While they might all not think it's the best way to go, I hope at least they see what they said they wanted to achieve in it, like whether it's in the outcomes or the mandate or the principles. That's the first part, is showing that we're listening. And then throughout the process, being super diligent in how because the process will matter, not just the outcomes. If people don't feel included, don't feel listened to, the best result will not build the trust you're talking about. So we gotta earn that trust back. Like not just me and the government.
Right.
In fact, I would say more the system than anything else. This chronic normalized bad behavior. Like, bad things have happened.
I got 2 little boys, and there's certain sports I wouldn't put them in because of culture issues, and or wouldn't push them to join, right?
Yes.
Because of this. So it's important work that needs to be done. Minister of Sport Carla Qualtrough, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for the conversation. Very important.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to get some reaction to today's announcement. I'm joined now by Allison Forsyth, who is the president of Generation Safe, a safe sport education and consulting company. And Allison is also a former Canadian Olympic skier and a survivor of sexual abuse within the Canadian sports system. Allison Forsyth, I want to thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
What do you make of what Minister Qualtrough has done here today and her reasonings to launch a commission as opposed to a public inquiry to look into this?
Yeah, from the announcement today to just now having the pleasure of hearing her speak, I will say that I'm very aligned with the approach. I've been in this space for a long time. I've been working and advocating as an athlete survivor for the last 5 to 6 years, and I've seen a lot of changes happen. I've seen a lot of discussions happen, a lot of observations happen, but I believe this to be a critical step in the right direction. I really appreciate the commission-based approach as opposed to a public inquiry. I agree 100% with all of Minister Qualtrough's sentiments around how I would feel as a survivor. I mean, I've already been through a criminal trial, civil proceedings. I would never want to be forced to come in and tell my story if I didn't want to. It makes me hot even just thinking about it. So I think ideally we will never have the perfect solution for probably 5 to 10 years, because I want to stress, I think it's very important to stress, because I now work internationally in this space, is that we could focus only on us and what problems we have, but I think we also need to celebrate that we are actually seen as a world's leader in this space, because we're tackling an issue in sport that exists not only in our country, but across the world. So I digress. But I'm very happy with what I heard today as a survivor, someone who advocates in this space and works in this space daily on the front lines.
Yeah, when I heard it wasn't going to be a public inquiry, I considered the elements of them not being able to compel people to testify, but I never considered it the way you've put it, that you wouldn't want to be compelled to tell your story under cross-examination. So obviously you agree with that decision, that rationale for this decision, but you've also said there is no finish line for safeguarding Canadian athletes, that abuse will never be prevented if we only focus on the horrific things that have happened without emphasis on continuous education. Where does this commission land in that process of the culture change the minister said she is seeking to force in Canadian sports?
Yeah, I mean, I've been clear for the last few years about this, and probably a pretty bit outspoken. We have been very focused on what happens when something bad happens, whether that's truly independent or what are we doing about it or what are we setting up. I live and breathe 80% of my life, if not 90%, in the education space. And I think the realities of the front line that we need to recognize is there is many, many, many sport folks out here, coaches, athletes, referees, and administrators who are still just learning what the term safe sport means. So my caution to us as we move forward with spending a lot of funding to look backwards, which I appreciate because I know we still have things to figure out. I also completely agree that we know the problem, and I think we ultimately know a lot of the solutions. So I just would say that we need to shift, and we need to get what I call to be upstream into actually preventing the maltreatment. I'll add one other thing. Right. One thing I do for education is what I consider sanctioning education. So that's if, an athlete, is sanctioned for something, or a team for hazing, as an example, they are sent to me to be educated. And I would just ask us a critical question. Why are we providing that education after the hazing has already occurred? So I think that's an interesting way to see it.
Right, be preventative as opposed to corrective, in the hopes of not having to be corrective. So you're an advocate on this. You're a former elite athlete. I think you're also a hockey mom. You got 3 kids. I mean, for your children. What's that? Yeah. Just what does a culture of safe sports look like for your kids in a few years, if this has the outcome you're hoping for?
Like Minister Qualtrough, I firstly identify, I've got 3 of them in there right now waiting to decorate the Christmas tree. So they're wonderful athletes. They have chosen their sports. They've chosen hockey and cheer. I will always stand for and believe that overall sport is a wonderful place to raise our children. And with that, we do have to all commit. Because even within my own children's sports, I see issues with parents and coaches and officials. There's issues everywhere we go, and I think we all know it, like Qualtrough said. So
just as a final point, I mean, you've been at this for years, advocating for change. How does it feel to get to this point, that you're going to get this process, at least, to try to attack the problem you've been speaking about for a long time?
I mean, I would say I finally have trust. I don't know, that's a word that comes to me. I do have trust. I've always been, I haven't ever taken sides in this issue. I'm not political by nature. So I've just been waiting for a person or a system or something that I think will actually work. And I believe in this. And I'll just stress that we need to get it to the grassroots level. We need to understand that there's millions of parents in our country that don't know about safe sport yet. And so we need to drive it down to where our kids actually are, which is our clubs.
Allison Forsyth, we're going to let you go decorate that Christmas tree with the kids. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.